I'm Heather Mackay-Brown. I'm one of the co-presidents of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham, Whatcom County, and I'm very pleased to see a good turnout on a very foggy day. I hope nobody got lost or collected a milk truck on the way here. I know I nearly did, coming from Linden. So today's forum is devoted to the 1st Congressional District representatives and the candidates for the 42nd Legislative District representatives and state senator. Our last forum is this coming Wednesday, October the 24th. It's an evening forum in the Whatcom County Council chambers, and those debates will be for the 40th Legislative District representatives and the 2nd Congressional District. So that evening session, there'll be an informal conversation with the candidates from 6 to 7 p.m. So keep an eye on the League of Women Voters website and also the Bellingham Herald to find out more about dates and times if you need to check those. And just lastly, to remind you that these forums are the property of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham, Whatcom County, and of the City of Bellingham. They may not be used in any manner without specific written permission from both parties. So, with the formalities over, I would like to introduce our first moderator for the 1st Congressional District Representative debate. That is Rebecca Johnson, a longtime League member and past president and longtime moderator, and she will introduce the candidates and explain the rules. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, Heather. But good morning, everyone. The first race we'll feature this morning will be the Congressional District representatives. There are 2 candidates on your ballot for this race, and I would like to introduce candidates Susan Delbene and Jeffrey Beeler. And we're going to hold applause. So, office description. Members of Congress are responsible for representing the people of their district in the United States House of Representatives. Part of this responsibility includes drafting and voting on legislation in the U.S. Congress. Representatives decide whether to vote or against every bill that comes before the full House of Representatives. All bills must pass both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate before they can go to the President to be signed into law. In order to produce better legislation, members spend a lot of time meeting with people who live in the state to talk about what is happening in government and to listen to their suggestions for bills. They also participate in hearings and briefings and have to work to build support for their position. A representative's term of office is 2 years, and the annual salary is $174,000. We will follow specific rules for this debate. Candidates will have up to 2 minutes each for an opening statement. They'll have 1 minute to respond to each question, and they will make a 1-minute closing statement. Each candidate has a challenge card. Do you have your cards there? Which you can hold up and flash at me and if you want to challenge your opponent. Candidates can use this charge to challenge or rebut their opponent's response. The challenging candidate will have 45 seconds to state the challenge, and his or her opponent will have 45 seconds to respond to the challenge. And you can each use that card only once. We have timers. Carol Como and Judy Hopkinson are right here in front, and they will be tracking the time. Timers will flash a yellow card. You want to really, and when you have 15 seconds remain and a red sign to signal time is up, and if the candidate continues, a bell is going to ring, and that means stop talking. We have asked the candidates we ask that the candidates be respectful of the time allotted due to the limited amount of time that we have and our desire to include as many questions as possible. So, audience, I'd like to remind you, to the audience, to please hold your applause or any, calling out or anything until the conclusion of the forum. We encourage members of the audience to please provide written questions for the candidates. Questions you submit will be asked to both candidates. We won't be directing anyone to an individual. And the questions are screened by League members, Annette Holcomb and Heather Mackay-Brown, and they'll be screening for legibility and clarity, and we're trying to avoid any duplication. So to begin, the candidates rolled dice, and the high roller had the choice of either going first with their opening statement or having the last closing statement. And the order we're going to be doing this is candidate Beeler is going to go first, and then as we start, I will alternate which of, who I ask to speak and answer the question first. So, we've covered the ground rules. Timers, are you ready? Why don't we get started? Candidate Beeler, please give us your 2-minute opening statement.
What I am is I'm a small business owner of 30 years. I grew up in the Mukilteo area, graduated from Mariner High School. I married my high school sweetheart, and we've got 3 kids. I've got 2 biological boys and 1 adopted girl we adopted from Ethiopia back about 8 or 9 years ago now. We moved out to the city of Sultan in 2000 to raise our family in a nice small town. And after being there for a few years, I started hearing things about the city, as you do, grumblings, rumors, etc. And I was the type of person that said, don't listen to rumors, go out, find the information, and get it straight from the horse's mouth. That got me involved. I was asked to get on to an advisory panel in 2007, where we were looking at the city's budget going into the recession. They were concerned about, could the city make it through? I chaired that committee, and it was through that committee that I was able to make suggestions, recommendations to the city on what they could do. We were able to make it through without gutting programs or eliminating staff. The next year, the city was looking at creating a utility. They came to me again and said, Jeffrey, we'd love to have you participate. I took a look at what the city was proposing, and I said, we're going into recession. You're going to kill the small businesses in town. This is ridiculous. So it was through working with the businesses and working with the city, we were again able to develop a utility that was good for both. Every time that I've been asked to do something, I've stepped up. I've been a leader, a bridge builder, and that's what I want to do here for Congress. I was asked again, and so that's what I want to do. Thank you.
Candidate Del Bene, your opening statement.
Good morning. I'm Susan Del Bene, and I have the honor of representing the 1st Congressional District, which is our district here, goes from all of Whatcom County except for Bellingham all the way down to northeastern King County. A beautiful district, a diverse district, rural and urban, set up to be a swing district. And it has been my honor to represent this district since 2012. I actually think we would be in a better place if we had a few more districts like ours where folks can hear every point of view and come up with solutions to problems based on understanding how those solutions impact different communities across our region. I ran for Congress originally because I believe that everyone in our country should have access to opportunity. My dad lost his job when I was in the 4th grade. We moved all over the country as my parents looked for work. And when I graduated from college, and I got to go to college because of student loans and financial aid, my parents moved in with me because they didn't have another place to go. And yet that great education I had helped me to have a successful career so I could be in a position to take care of my family. And I ran because I think it's harder and harder for folks who are growing up like I did, or people changing jobs like my dad had to get by today. And we need to fight to make sure that we strengthen the middle class and expand the middle class, fight on issues like health care, infrastructure, and real dollar investments in infrastructure. I've spent a lot of time working on agriculture. That was the first committee I served on as a member of Congress, on the Ag Committee, so working on issues to help our farmers, issues of trade, and I feel like if we have folks who are willing to work across the aisle to find solutions, we can make a difference even in this Congress. And I thank you again for being here and for taking the time to be engaged.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to our questions. You will each have 60 seconds to answer the questions, and I'm going to start with candidate Del Bene. The current political environment poses challenges. How do you believe you can be effective given this environment?
Well, the first thing you do is you listen. And I've held town halls throughout our district, right here in Ferndale, throughout Whatcom County, through our small towns, large towns, to listen, to hear what people have to say, what issues, federal issues are impacting them, what we can do. And then you talk to other people. You talk to people who you might disagree with and understand where they're coming from and what it would take, how we can come up to an agreement and put that together and build consensus. I actually think there's been many opportunities. I worked on the farm bill when I was first a member of Congress. We had a bipartisan farm bill that was actually a great farm bill for our farmers, for specialty crop farmers. But it was because people were willing to come together, listen, and stand up and vote. It's hard because not all legislation gets to the floor these days. Leadership doesn't let those bills, even bipartisan bills, move. That needs to change so that we can have great solutions for people in our country.
Okay, Candidate Beeler.
So it was mentioned about how the political environment is so polarized. And, that's kind of why I got involved with our cities, because there seemed to be a polarized, even in our small city back, 10, 15 years ago. And Congress, as we know, what's the biggest challenge we always hear? Either the left is holding us back or the right is holding us back. It's the ones in the middle, the ones who really want to get things done. It's actually probably the majority of people in Congress. So as a leader in my community, I built those bridges. I brought those two sides together and I found the common ground. And that's what I propose to bring back to Congress, is somebody who can actually do the bridge building, the getting rid of the polarization, find that common ground and move the country forward on ideas that have been stuck for 50 years or 30 years. Things that I thought would be finished by the time I hit 50, and they're not. Fortunately, I'm not 50 yet, so I still got a year to go.
Okay, thank you. All right, Candidate Beeler, we're going to start you with this next question. What will you do to support a vibrant economy that benefit all individuals and families, regardless of gender, race, or class in our state?
To me, a vibrant economy goes back to the free market economy. I'm the type that says, let's get government out of the way. We can't make our lives better by continuing to tax society. One of the things that you hear coming out of Seattle is the fact that it's so unaffordable. And yet every time you turn around, they want to throw another tax on things. Property tax is probably one of the biggest taxes that makes housing unaffordable. When you have a property that's taxed at $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, how can people survive that? I lived out in Sultan. I moved out there for the reasons of affordability. I have great community. I have great people from all different sources, from all different regions, from all different walks of life out there. And we built that together. And that's my goal, is to say, let's get government out of the way. Let free market take over. Free market reduces the cost of things. Get rid of the regulations that the government proposes on us.
Thank you. Candidate Del Bene?
I started out talking about how everyone should have access to opportunity, and I believe that very strongly. That means access to a great education, from early learning all the way through higher education, making sure that we have opportunities for people to pursue the types of careers that they want, but everyone should have access to great education, to health care. Quality, affordable health care, period. That needs to be true for people to be able to be successful and pursue their dreams. We need strong infrastructure so people can move, for people and goods can move throughout our region. That's foundational for our economy. Housing, we've had a housing crisis throughout our region. Affordable housing has been hard to find, and we've done work with the USDA here in Whatcom County to help, and in Ferndale in particular, to help provide more affordable housing. Again, it's hard to be successful if you don't have a roof over your head or you don't have enough to eat. We need to stand up for everyone in our community.
Okay, thank you. You are both welcome to ask me to repeat the question too, if you'd like. All right, so Candidate Del Bene, we're going to start with you on this one. What would you tell a dreamer brought here at the age of 3, educated in Whatcom County, enrolled as a Western Washington University student, and working at the local business about the possibility of citizenship?
First, I'd say thank you for your question and for standing up. We've had so many incredible students stand up because they are making incredible contributions to our country. I believe we should pass legislation to support dreamers. this is their home. And we should make sure that they have that status, that legal status to be home. They should have a path to citizenship. This is a bipartisan issue. We have legislation. I've helped introduce legislation on this issue. It has been blocked from coming to the floor by Republican leadership in the House. And we almost passed it, this Congress even, except it was blocked. We need to have leadership that's going to allow every single member of Congress to vote, because I believe we would pass legislation to protect dreamers if we were just allowed a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives.
Thank you. Candidate Buehler?
This goes back to the 50-year-old question, why isn't immigration resolved? When I was a kid, there were families in my neighborhood. I grew up in California, moved up here later on in high school. But I had friends who would disappear, who were Hispanic. Of course, I was only 8 or 9. How did my parents explain it to me? Well, Jeffrey, the immigration services took them away. That meant nothing to me. That's wrong in a sense of today, 50 years later, it's still happening because we haven't resolved the question of what and how do we do immigration reform. The 3-year-old who's now 20-something, who knows nothing other than the United States as their home, I have compassion for them. The people that I am concerned about, the ones that broke the law, those are the ones that we need to deal with. These are parents that came over here illegally. We need to say, hey, look, you have committed a crime. Now, if you've been here for 30 years and we haven't enforced the law, whose fault is that? It's Congress's fault. That's why I want to go back to Congress to say, let's fix a 50-year-old problem now, not wait another 50 years.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Candidate Buehler, we're going to start with you on this one. Single-payer health care is now supported by a majority of Americans, both Democrat and Republican. Would you support single-payer health care legislation, and please explain?
The question comes back to, do you want to pay the double amount of the taxes you're paying now? Because if you look at the single-payer system as it was proposed, over the next 10 years, it's $32 trillion, which is 3.2 a year. The federal budget is only 4.1. So if you are willing to pay double the taxes and allow the government to control, which I got involved with government because I found it to be somewhat inefficient, I believe a single-payer system is not the way to go. Again, go back to free market. We have a healthcare system where if you opened up insurance to be sold across state lines, if you reformed our tort system, reducing the cost of frivolous lawsuits, if you worked with prescription drugs and reduced the cost of them, affordable healthcare would happen. Look what happened with ACA. I'm a small business guy. I provide for the last 30 years my family with insurance. It has become so unaffordable in the last 10 years, and I've had to switch companies 3 times. We need to fix that system.
It is terrible to see what's happened to healthcare, especially in this Congress, with ongoing attempts to repeal with no idea how to replace, as opposed to making sure that we are focused on a goal of everyone in our country having affordable, quality healthcare. I believe that we should have a public option, whether that's a buy-in to Medicare that people could choose, or another form of a public option that's available. There's been proposals on things like creating something called the Medicare Part E that could be available, and I'm on pieces of legislation to support those. But I believe we need to provide that choice so that people have that option, and we may be in a place where many people choose that. But instead of protecting people with pre-existing conditions and getting rid of lifetime caps, Republicans have done more and more to undermine coverage, to take away access, to increase premiums. It's terrible. We need to move forward on health care.
Thank you. Okay, Candidate Del Bene, we're going to go first with you on this next one. Do you support public financing of elections for Congress? And then tell us why or why not.
So first, I'll say we absolutely need campaign finance reform, and I've supported overturning the Citizens United decision. That's a heavy lift, but I think critically important, because what people want to see is transparency and disclosure. I also am supporting a piece of legislation called the Disclose Act, which would make sure that we don't have dark money that you hear about all the time, that you don't see ads for Americans for good things, and you don't know who's behind that. We need to make sure that there's disclosure and people know who's paying for that, because independent expenditures have really overwhelmed candidates in many cases. Public financing can be part of that solution, and we have a few bills to try to address, to put our elections back in the hands of the people, but that's going to mean that we need to have different leadership in Congress, because we haven't been allowed to move any of those bills in this Congress, for sure.
Thank you. Candidate Beeler?
Prime example. Back in April, my campaign advisor says to me, so Jeffrey, how much money do you have in the bank? Your opponent has almost $1 million. I'm new to the block. I'm at an adverse situation because I don't have the resources that my opponent does to get out the message that I want. But at the same time, I look at it, this is America, where we have the ability to speak freely. And any time you stop the freedom of speech in this country, you've taken away our rights. And what next do you want to take away from? Now, do we need to contain some of the things that are going on? Like, you know, you've got these commercials between Dino Rossi and Shriver. You don't know who's telling the truth. So we need to have more oversight over the things that are being put out, not how much money is being put in. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to go with you first, Candidate Beeler, on this next question. The recent landmark IPCC, I think that was the International something on climate change out of the UN, report indicates that we have only 10 to 12 years to reduce greenhouse gases, or by 2020, 22 years from now, rising seas will be inundating our coast. Extreme weather like droughts or hurricanes will become more severe, and there will be a worsening of food shortages. Whether or not you believe that human activity is the cause of climate change, what do you think our federal government can do to protect us from the associated financial risks?
To me, it comes down to, in the last 10 years, we've been given these reports 4 different times that the end is coming, the sky is falling, Chicken Little. Now, let's take a look at what we're doing to the environment. Here in the state of Washington, we have created some of the greenest opportunities. We have some of the best environmental controls, and they're working. Now, let's influence countries like China, India. If you go to their economies and you look at their skies, they're terrible. That's where we need to be concentrating our efforts. This country has done a fabulous job over the last 40 or 30 years to clean up. I don't believe in the death scenario of, in 10 years, we heard 10 years ago that in 10 years it would be over. Well, the oceans have not risen 3 feet, and we are not in a climate where the temperatures have increased, 10 degrees.
Thank you. Candidate Del Bene, do you want me to repeat it? Or?
I think the recent report just really was another alarm, saying what scientists have been saying for a long time now, and I think the science is pretty clear that climate is a threat, what's happening to our climate is a threat to our lives, to the livelihood of future generations, and it is beyond time for us to take action. It is terrible that this president pulled out of the Paris Agreement, which is very much a preliminary step on climate. And we've seen the evidence. We know carbon is having an impact. We've seen glaciers receding. We've seen fires in our area, and the smoke in the last couple of summers, increased floods and drought, ocean acidification, if we're talking about our oceans and the impact there. So we have an economic opportunity as well to move to clean, renewable energy. This is a place actually where in our innovative state, we actually have this could be an economic advantage for us. So we need to move quickly.
Thank you. All right, Candidate Del Bene, here's the next question. Do you believe there's a need for additional legislation to reduce gun violence in our schools? And if so, what legislation?
I do not believe that any one piece of legislation is going to prevent every senseless act of gun violence, but I do believe we absolutely can do more, and we should. I've supported universal background checks in Congress. I have supported an assault weapons ban on bump stocks. I mean, we even had to fight to lift a ban on using federal dollars that would allow the Centers of Disease Control, the CDC, just to do research into the public health impact of gun violence. That's how much of a stranglehold has been on to do any work to address gun violence. You heard bipartisan support to ban bump stocks, but then leadership in the House did not allow us to actually vote on that. This is something where I think people have been clear, people in our state have been clear. We can take responsible steps and pass legislation, and I support that legislation.
And Candidate Beeler.
Yes. So what steps can Congress take? Well, I think we need to go back a little bit closer to our local jurisdictions. We have limited the ability of police to enforce the laws that are on the books to help control gun violence. One of the things that we have done as a society, though, is that when a gun is used in a crime, we've actually said there are higher punishments for that. But if you go into places where gun control has actually been increased, such as Detroit or Chicago, gun violence is actually up. And it's not up by school shootings, it's up in crime. It's gang crime, it's stealing, it's going into and robbing banks. It's the stuff that we should be enforcing and going after and then locking these people up. Gun violence is only the person who has the gun. When you talk to the farmers and the ranchers out here, they are responsible gun owners. Criminals are not. Enforce the laws.
All right, we're going to move to our last question, and then after that, you'll each have your 1-minute closing. Candidate Beeler, what responsibility do you think local elected officials have to be role models for the community?
We are the ones in public view. We, in some ways, should be held to a little bit higher standard because people are going to be looking up to us. Your kids. It's one of those situations where when you see an elected official do something wrong, everybody points it out, and you wonder how in the world did they get to where they were. So as an elected official, yes, we should be held to a higher standard. If we don't hold that standard, we shouldn't be in our position because we're the ones responsible for creating those laws here. We're the ones responsible for whether we do tax reform. Those are the things that are important to society. So when it comes to us as electeds, yes, we need higher standards.
I think it's an important responsibility to promote civil discourse, to listen, to bring people together and create a dialogue as opposed to divide. I think it's also important for leaders to stand up when fellow members of our community are being attacked. I think when this president has tweeted against members of our community, whether it's women or Muslims or immigrants, where are the strong voices standing up saying those aren't our values, that's not who we are, and we stand up for all members of our community. I think that's an important role that we all play, and I think that not enough people are doing it right now, which is a huge problem in Congress. And I think if more people did and helped to bring people together, we could be on a better path. And I'd say that's also responsible for every single one of us as citizens and members of our community to do that for our fellow friends and family.
Okay, thank you so much. Candidate Beeler, we're going to give you the first opportunity to give a closing statement. You have 1 minute.
All right, so I'm going to get everything out I can in 1 minute. All right. The debt in this country is $21 trillion, and it has been an issue for decades. Immigration has been an issue for decades. Social Security, I'm going to be 15, 17 years away from Social Security. It has been an issue. I've been told it won't be there for me We have plenty of time to fix these things. But Congress, and I don't care whether it's the Republicans in control who are there now, or the Democrats who were in control during the Obama administration, or during the Bush administration, or it goes back and forth, back and forth. The leadership of both sides don't allow things to happen, and I think that's wrong. That's why I want to go back there to say, hey, look, leadership, we need to step across the lines and say, let's get these problems fixed. They shouldn't be around for decades. And I have the experience and the leadership and the bridge building to go ahead and do that for us. And I will be the one to say, hey, look, when my leadership stops things, I'll step up and be the first one to say they're wrong.
Thank you. Okay, and Candidate Del Bene, if you'd give us your 1-minute closing.
We need to stand up for working families across our country, across our region, to grow and strengthen the middle class, to make sure that everyone in our country has access to opportunity. That means healthcare for everyone. It means making investments in things that make our economy strong, like our infrastructure, including rural broadband. We talk a lot about roads and bridges, but we should talk about rural broadband and other parts of infrastructure that are critical. Housing, making sure that if someone has a roof over their head and has food to eat, they have access to opportunity, to make sure that everyone has a great education. These are things that need to be our priorities. And I would also say a huge priority is making sure that Congress is doing its job, providing oversight of the executive branch too. I have been fighting for our region for the last 6 years. I think we need everyone to vote, and some people have their voting buttons on already, but if you vote, it'll make a huge difference for the country.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, please everybody join me in thanking our candidates for being here today, and thank you for running for public office.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna leave those two there.
Well, thank you to our candidates and to Rebecca for moderating. So while our candidates for the 42nd District Representative Position 1 take the stage, that's Justin Bonneau and Luann van Werven, I will introduce you to Kathy Washatka, who will moderate this debate. She's also a longtime League member, and she will introduce the candidates and explain the rules if you've forgotten what they were from the first time.
You're going to have these down by heart by the time we're done here. Thank you, Heather. Our next race is for the 42nd Legislative District Representative Position 1 seat. There are 2 candidates on your ballot for this race. I would like to introduce candidates Justin Bonneau and Luann van Werven. Welcome. The state constitution prescribes that a representative must be a citizen of the United States and a qualified voter in the legislative district from which he or she was chosen. The House is made up of 98 members, 2 from each legislative district in the state. The total membership of the House is elected at the general election held in November of each even-numbered year. During legislative sessions, the legislature is called upon to enact or reject legislation affecting public policy in the state, provide for the levy and collection of taxes and other revenue to support state government, and assist local government, and appropriate funds for these purposes. The House also has the exclusive power to bring impeachment proceedings, although laws are enacted only when the legislature is convened in formal session. Policy issues and the general operation of state and local government are under continuous review by legislators serving on permanent and interim study committees. A representative's term of office is 2 years with an annual salary of $48,731. The rules we will follow are the same as the previous race. Candidates will have up to 2 minutes each for opening statements. They will have 1 minute to respond to each question and will make a 1-minute closing statement. Each candidate has a challenge card. Let's see your cards, please. Thanks. And they may use this card to challenge or rebut their opponent's response. The challenging candidate will have 45 seconds to state the challenge, and the opponent will have 45 seconds to respond to the challenge. Each candidate may use their challenge card one time. Carol Camo and Judy Hopkinson, right up here, are tracking the time. Thank you, ladies. Timers will flash a yellow sign when there's 15 seconds remain, and a red sign to signal time is up. If a candidate continues, a bell will be rung to signal stop talking. We ask that the candidates be respectful of the time allotted due to the limited amount of time that we have and our desire to include as many questions as possible. I would like to remind the audience to please hold your applause until the conclusion of the forum, and we encourage members of the audience to provide written questions for the candidates. Questions you submit will be asked of both candidates. Ushers are available, they're in the back, and will to pick up your questions, and then they'll bring them to the table right over here with the screeners. So ushers, will you wave your hands? Okay, thanks. And then questions will be screened by our league members, Annette Holcomb and Heather Mackay-Brown. They'll be screening for legibility, clarity, and to avoid duplication. So to begin, candidates rolled a dice, and the high roller had the choice of going first with their opening statement or having the last closing statement. Candidate Van Werven will go first, and after we start, I will alternate which candidate speaks first as I ask the questions. So let's get started. Timers, are you ready? Okay, good. So candidate Van Werven, will you please give your 2-minute opening statement?
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I'm Luann Van Werven, and I've served as your state representative for the last 4 years, and I'm running for re-election for another 2-year term. While I've been in Olympia, I have been appointed to the Transportation Committee, the Public Safety Committee, and the Higher Ed Committee, and I'm ranking on the Higher Ed Committee. And that is my great honor. These are 3 very critical committees for our community. I've also been appointed to the Task Force Against Human Trafficking, and in that role, I've had the opportunity to help teach and train hotel workers, restaurant workers, how to spot a potential human trafficking. And so these are some very important topics that I've been working on down in Olympia. So I know that budgets are tight. So when I went down to Olympia, one of the things that I have worked hard on, that is protecting your wallets from tax increases. At this time of record tax collections into Olympia, I'm at a loss to see why we would need to raise taxes at this point, and I think it's time to give taxpayers their money back. I worked on property tax reduction. I introduced a bill that would have frozen our property taxes at the 2017 levels, but that was rejected. So when I go back to Olympia, I want to focus on the priorities that matter to you, and that is safe schools, safe neighborhoods, good paying jobs with nearby affordable housing. These are some of the things that I'm working on. I want to focus on agriculture and industries. I want to, in my role as higher education ranking chair, to make sure that we can send our students from a direct line from students to careers. Thank you.
Candidate Bonneau.
Howdy, folks. My name is Justin Bonneau. I'm a working father, renter, and a Navy veteran. I'm running to be your representative in Olympia because we need leaders who represent working people. We need leadership that knows what it's like to have their rent go up 3 times in 2 years. We need leadership that knows what it's like to split shift it with their wife because they can't afford childcare. We need leadership that knows what it's like to avoid going to the doctor because their child is sick, because they're afraid of what kind of healthcare bills they might incur. We also need leadership that knows what it's like to have their cost of living increase while their wages stay stagnant. Most of my community knows what this struggle is like, and I'm afraid that it seems as if that our current representatives don't. State legislation impacts are real. They affect working people. And it seems as if our current representatives aren't helping. I know these problems facing our community because these are indeed my own lived experiences, and I'm running to solve them. A little bit about myself. After graduating high school from Oak Harbor High in 1999, I enlisted in the United States Navy. I was a machinist mate in the nuclear propulsion program. I served 6 years, and then after being honorably discharged, I relocated here to Whatcom County, went to school in the area, and then after graduating from Western Washington University in 2010, started working with the Department of Ecology. So my whole entire adult life has been in service to either the country or community. I'd encourage you guys to look me up on justinbonneau.com. And if you already have your ballot, please fill it out and turn it in. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so candidate Bonneau, we're going to give you the first question first. What qualities do you possess that differentiate you from your opponent in being an effective representative for this district?
Well, like I said earlier, I think that I am a working father. My wife and I both work. I work full-time. My wife gets as many hours as she can, and I think that I know what it's like to be a working family here in Whatcom County, and I think that I know that what the needs are of working families here in Whatcom County. I think that having those lived experiences would help me craft effective legislation to ease the burden on folks like myself.
Thank you. Candidate Van Werven?
Thank you for that question. I grew up in a Teamster home, so I know the importance of working hard and all that goes into earning a paycheck. My husband and I, we ran a successful business here in Whatcom County, and it was not easy. There were many lean years, and in the beginning, we were working with agencies who cared about our success, but as time went on, it got harder and harder because there were multiple agencies, and now suddenly the burden of proof was on us. But despite all that, we grew that business into a successful local business. It was Ferndale Ready Mix, which is still going strong. It's our son that is working in the company now, but I obviously have the experience and the qualifications based on my 4 years in Olympia, and also going back decades before that as I worked hard to get people involved in our political system.
Thank you. Candidate Van Werven, we're going to start with you. Do you support a carbon fee as proposed in I-1631? Please explain.
I do not support 1631, and I think that Whatcom County and our industries are a target in that initiative. I reject the idea that a board of 15 politically appointed people would have the decisions on how to spend $30 billion just in the first year alone. And this is going to hurt the people who can least afford it. I was just talking with some retired people yesterday, and brought to them the frank realization that their home heating bills could go up. The fuel that they use for their vehicles are going to go up. That's all a matter of fact. And I believe that everything that is put together in this initiative will have no effect on our climate. And so it is about a slush fund for political appointees to be able to spend the money as they direct.
Thank you. Candidate Bonneau?
I do support Initiative 1631. Climate change is real, it's man-made, and we need to start doing something about that. The revenues generated from 1631 will help make green energy infrastructure here in Washington State, and I'd like to see as many of those jobs as possible come here to Whatcom County. I think that the intergovernmental panel on climate change was, it still has me very anxious about what sort of future my child and her children might have, and so we need to start working on this issue now. If it's not going to happen at the federal level, we need to start doing something at the state level, and then hopefully other states will adopt it.
Thank you. We have a challenge from candidate Van Werven.
Thank you. My opponent has brought up this UN study several times, and so I decided to start looking into it and do some research. Well, it turns out that this latest report was revised. The first one gave us 3 years, but guess what? Carbon emissions had not increased to the extent that they had thought, and temperatures had not increased to the extent they thought. So they pushed it out to 10 years. And the panel members on this UN panel are anti-capitalists. So they have a hidden agenda, or not so hidden agenda. And so this idea that we now have 10 years, well, let's be real. What's the next change going to be? Are they going to push it out even more? Because let's be real, the models are not accurate.
Candidate Bonneau?
I mean, I think that, look, climate scientists are in consensus with that this is indeed man-made. The only people that disagree, that call themselves climate scientists, are paid for by the fossil fuel industry. And so I don't know where she said, what evidence she has that these climate scientists are anti-capitalist. I don't understand that. In fact, there's a Yale economist who was...
Check their backgrounds.
Yeah, there's a Yale economist who is instrumental in having the idea of a carbon pricing regime. So
Sorry. Okay, we're going to go back to regular questions, and we're going to start with candidate Bonneau. If elected, what legislation would you make a personal priority to pass because you believe it would most benefit the people of your district, and why do you choose it?
well, there was a working families tax credit that was made in 2008 that would actually materially benefit working families here in Whatcom County, and for whatever reason, it hasn't been funded. Luann has represented us since 2014, and I don't think that she's done enough to get that funded. I would like to see that funded. I think that would be high on my priorities with regards to what I'd like for legislation prioritization. But yeah, that is something that I could see that would materially benefit working families here in Whatcom County.
Thank you. Candidate Van Werven.
I'm going to continue to stand in the gap for low and middle income families that need a tax break. We are talking about record tax revenues coming into Olympia, and it's time to give some of that money back. I'm going to continue to fight for the expected property tax reduction that is coming next year. This year we had a spike. Next year it's set to go lower. Already we're hearing talk that, well, maybe we can't afford it. I'm sorry, $3.2 billion into Olympia, and we can't afford a property tax reduction? So the other thing that is of concern to me as ranking on the Higher Education Committee, that all of our students have freedom of expression on college campus. And so that is something I've been working on, putting together legislation so that all people can have a voice on college campuses. That's really important here in Whatcom County because we have we have Western Washington University, BTC, Whatcom Community College, and the Northwest Indian College.
Thank you. I want to please remind the audience to be respectful and hold your comments and laughter to yourselves, please. I'm going to start with candidate Van Werven with this one. What is the most effective step you can take to minimize the divisiveness we see in our country today?
So it's interesting. Most people think of elected politicians as, always being in conflict with each other. Well, I'm here to tell you in Olympia, as an effective leader, you need to check your division and hostility at the door and come to Olympia to work together. And that is exactly what we've done. That was one of the misimpressions that I had, that we were always at conflict. But when we come together down in Olympia, we realize if we want to get any legislation passed, we need to work with the other side. So my bills have been bipartisan, and they have passed unanimous through the House, through the Senate, and also signed into law by the governor. So that is one thing people don't realize, and I want you to be encouraged. We work together in Olympia, and I think we all have a responsibility to be civil and compassionate and respectful of each other's opinions.
Thank you. Candidate Bonneau.
I understand the need for bipartisanship. However, I am going to fight for working families here in Whatcom County. I'm not going to sell them out. I'm going to fight as hard as I can. And because I think that, the issues are real here in Whatcom County. It's getting harder and harder to make ends meet, and we need to find ways to alleviate the burden on these families. So, I have a pretty good personality, I think. I don't know. I get along with most folks. So, divisiveness, I think I can talk to most people, but I'm not going to sell out working families of Whatcom County.
Thank you. Candidate Bonneau, we're going to start with you on this one. As state legislator, what bills would you sponsor or have you sponsored concerning women's reproductive health?
Well, because I'm not a state legislative person, I haven't sponsored anything, but but I will do everything in my power to protect women's reproductive health at the state level. It is when the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh was seated, I think that it's just a matter of time before it becomes a state issue again. And this is going to be at the state legislature. That's the last firewall between, us or women having the right to choose what they can and cannot do with their own bodies. And so, yes, I will do whatever it takes in order for women to have their a say in what they can and cannot do with their own bodies.
Thank you. Candidate Van Werven.
Thank you. So I am pro-life, and I believe in the protection of the most vulnerable in our society. I will say that there are issues that I would hope we could agree on, and a bill that I introduced would ban abortion at the point where an unborn child can feel pain. I would hope that that would be something we could agree on. I also introduced a bill that would ban the use of digoxin, which is a chemical that has been banned in the use of the death penalty, but they still use it for late-term abortions in unborn babies here in Washington State. So I believe in the absolute protection of the most vulnerable in our society. And I think as a civilized society, don't we all have a responsibility to protect those that can't protect themselves?
Thank you. And we have a challenge.
Yes, I mean, if we look into into Representative Van Werven's voting history, we can see that she also co-sponsored a bill that said that if a woman decided to terminate terminate a pregnancy, that she would be brought up on first-degree murder charges, and that the doctor that helped facilitate that termination would also be brought up on first-degree murder charges. And it was, in our state until recently, was a capital murder or a capital punishment state, and so I'd just like to highlight that fact.
Thank you. Candidate Van Werven.
Yes, I don't know where you're getting that from. That is just flat wrong. But I will say that I have been a co-sponsor on legislation that would allow for year-long access to contraceptives. I'm pro-life, but I believe in contraception.
Thank you. And we're going to have you, Candidate Van Werven, answer this one first. Do you think I-1639 is a necessary and adequate approach to avoid gun violence? And please explain and include any other ideas you may have.
So I do not support 1639. I think this is an infringement, our Second Amendment rights. Here in the state of Washington, what most people don't realize is we already have a robust system of background checks. We have the federal background check, we have the state background check. And so to come up with this further infringement on our rights so that I wouldn't even have the opportunity to protect myself is just wrong. So the other thing that bothers me about that bill is that if I don't lock up my weapons, as the government tells me to, someone comes into my house, steals my weapon, and commits a crime, I'm held liable. I absolutely believe in keeping my guns out of the hands of children. I have grandchildren, and they're in my home a lot. So when they are there, my guns are not accessible to them. But at night, if I want to be able to protect myself, I deserve that right.
Thank you. Candidate Bonneau?
I do support Initiative 1639. This initiative was able to get enough signatures in 3 weeks to make it on the ballot. And that goes to show, that goes to show the energy of which Washington State citizens want to see with regards to gun safety. I'm a Navy veteran. I'm also a responsible gun owner, but I lock up my gun. I lock up my rounds to make sure that, that Cecilia doesn't get her hands on it. Because God forbid if she decided to hurt herself or someone else, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. And so I think that the measures that are included in Initiative 1639 are just sensible gun safety laws that, as responsible gun owners, we should all embrace.
Thank you. Candidate Bonneau, this one's yours to start with. What would you do to address the serious mental health problems we have in Whatcom County?
I believe that we should have a single-payer healthcare system, a comprehensive single-payer healthcare system here in Washington State, and that would include mental health. So I would be in favor of funding it through that because I think everybody should have access to deal with any kind of mental health issue that they might have. A lot of our unhoused population is dealing with a mental health issue, and unfortunately, they don't have access to services that can help with those issues that they're having. So, I'd like to see funding for mental health through a universal healthcare system.
Thank you. Candidate Van Werven?
Thank you. It is no secret that we have dropped the ball here in Washington State on funding for mental and behavioral health services. Let me tell you what we have done just in this last biennium. We have provided $22 million that is coming into the 5-county region, this North County region, the northwest part of Washington State. $22 million that's going to provide for beds and services for those in need of mental health services. We have provided funding very specifically for Bellingham through the Sheriff's Department and also through the City of Bellingham for the Behavioral Health Center here in our county. And it's going to take us a while to catch up, but we recognize the problem and we are working as quickly as we can to fund these services.
Thank you. This next question, Candidate Van Werven, you're going to start with, it's kind of long, so just wanted to warn you. In March of 2017, the Association of Washington Business published a report stating that unreliable infrastructure, poor roads and airports result in higher costs for business to manufacture and distribute goods. Do you think Washington's infrastructure negatively impacts the ability of our state's business to manufacture and provide goods and services? If so, what should the legislature do to support business?
That's a good question. So here's what I will say to that. Any of us driving down to Seattle know that our traffic is impeded, and that includes the freight that is being carried to and from the Port of Seattle, Port of Tacoma. So we absolutely need to focus more on that infrastructure. And I would just say that way too much of the transportation dollars have been going to things like mass transit, in order to effectively transport people, but yet we don't see an increase in people using our mass transit. What we see instead is we see trucks stuck in traffic getting to the Port of Seattle. And so we need to focus more on congestion relief instead of mass transit.
Thank you. Candidate Bonneau?
Do you mind repeating the question, please?
Sure. In March of 2017, the Association of Washington Business published a report stating that unreliable infrastructure, poor roads, and airports result in higher costs for business to manufacture and distribute goods. Do you think Washington's infrastructure negatively impacts the ability of our state's business to manufacture and provide goods and services? If so, what should the legislature do to support business?
Well, I think that infrastructure is important. I think that being able to ship goods and services up and down our freeways is important to businesses. But I also love trains. I'm a big fan of trains and buses. And it's unfortunate that we're not seeing increased ridership in those things. But I think that, eventually people will start, if those services, trains and buses, were more reliable, we would see increased ridership in those modes of transportation. But yeah, we can have the, freeway infrastructure is important to ship goods and services up and down our state.
Thank you. Candidate Bonneau, what legislative measures would you support to address the lack of affordable housing for middle and lower income groups?
What was that again? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, what?
Can you repeat that?
Repeat it, sure. What legislative measures would you support to address the lack of affordable housing for middle and lower income groups?
Well, we have a Washington Housing Trust Fund that unfortunately during austerity measures of 2010 hasn't been fully funded, and I would like to see that fully funded back to its pre-recessionary levels, and then a serious increase, and it probably should be around double of what it was in 2010 if we adjusted for inflation. So doing that would provide serious investment in housing and increased housing stock in our community, which hopefully would provide downward pressure on the housing cost in our community.
Thank you. Candidate Van Werven?
Yes, we definitely have a crisis in supply. There's a lack of affordable housing. This problem actually dates back to 2008 when the construction industry collapsed. We felt it particularly hard here in Whatcom County, and we fell behind in supply. There's also regulations associated with the Growth Management Act that disincentivize affordable housing. And there's impact fees and taxes that are assessed at every single level of housing construction. And I think it's time that we take a close look at that and realize that the solution is not adding fees and restrictions to housing construction, but it is in incentivizing them so that they can have the opportunities to build affordable housing for all of us. I will say rent subsidies are definitely not the answer. The low-income people suffer first when we implement those policies.
Thank you. This next one is for you, Candidate Van Werven first. Washington State's tax structure is one of the most unfair and regressive in the nation. Lower income families pay more proportionally in taxes than the wealthy. If elected, how would you address this?
So I keep hearing this on the campaign trail that we have the most regressive tax system in the country, and that's just not true. It is instead how it is calculated. So our property tax is the foundation of our tax system, and that is the most stable, even during times of recession. The businesses, what people don't realize is that businesses pay business and occupational tax, and oftentimes that is lumped into sales tax figures, which then disproportionately reflects who pays those taxes. Truth is, the businesses pay most of those taxes. And when we talk about regressive taxes, I think we should be looking at 1631, which is probably the most regressive tax, also the tax on our groceries. Because guess what? Bill Gates pays the same amount for his groceries as does a low-income person. And so Washington State does not have the regressive tax system that is claimed.
Thank you. Candidate Bonneau?
That's just wrong. We do, in fact, have the most regressive tax system in all of the country. We have an upside-down tax regime. According to the Washington State Budget and Policy Center, folks with low incomes pay 7 times as more of their share of their household incomes in state and local taxes than the wealthiest 1%. And so, I mean, we've asked the poor and the working class to pay a larger share of their income to fund the services here in Washington State. And my opponent and her wealthy donors don't want to see this change because it would affect them. I do want to see it change because I want the wealthiest pay their fair share.
Thank you. This is your last question before the closing statements, so we're going to start with Candidate Bonneau. What is your plan to bring down college tuition costs for Washington State students?
Well, I'm intimately familiar with this because unfortunately, while I was able to go to school on the Montgomery GI Bill, I went under the pre-9/11 GI Bill, and so I was given a lump sum to try to pursue a 4-year education. And I ended up having to finance the last little bit, and I am having to deal with student debt, like many other households here in Whatcom County. And so having to service student debt and it has been a struggle, to be honest. But I'm of the mind that we should have free 2 years of school, whether it be a trade school or a community college. We can have that taxpayer, that could be taxpayer funded, and that would provide, skills, necessary skills to be competitive in this new economy.
Thank you. Candidate Van Werven?
So again, I will just mention what we've already done. And 3 years ago, the first in the nation, where we actually provided for a tuition reduction for our students in 4-year community colleges and technical colleges, and our state colleges as well. This was a first in the nation, and so this was, I think, a great way to make college more affordable, and we're sticking with our guns and doing everything we can to make college more affordable. My hallmark legislation provided for students in community and technical colleges to see in advance at the time of their registration what the cost of their textbooks were going to be, and they could make choices accordingly. I also made sure that in this legislation there's a link that goes directly to the open education resources where they can access free college textbooks.
Thank you. So now on to closing statements, and Candidate Bonneau, you have 1 minute to deliver yours.
Sure. There was a study done by the United Way that said that 40% of Whatcom County households couldn't afford a monthly budget that included their housing, health care, child care, food, transportation, or a phone. None of those things I have listed are luxuries in life. Those are all things that we need to have a dignified life here in Whatcom County. Now, I know that we can't do everything about all those things that I've listed, but I think that we can do something about housing. I think we can do something about health care, and I think we can do something about child care. I think that we should have, we should fully fund the Washington Housing Trust Fund. I think we should also re-examine the ban on rent regulation at the state level to address housing. I would like to see a single-payer healthcare system here in Washington State. Electing progressive members like myself can keep that conversation going. And then child care, I think that we should have a comprehensive birth through 5 child care system to alleviate the burden on working families like myself who have to split shifted in order to make ends meet.
Thank you. Candidate Van Werven.
I'm asking for your vote today because I am the most experienced and qualified candidate for state representative. My opponent and I may disagree on approach, but overall, we both want the same things. We want a clean environment. We want a safe place to raise our families. We want good educational choices and opportunities to work and prosper. I want to be free with a minimum of government intrusion over our lives. My opponent has painted an unfortunate picture because he is only a part-time employee of Department of Ecology, and his wife also works to help make ends meet. If he wants his lot in life to improve, then he needs to join the other side, because the policies of the Democratic Party will not help him. And Mr. Bonneau, when I go to Olympia, I will fight for you. As you think about what you have heard today, remember that I am the most qualified candidate for this position, and I would ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking the candidates for running and for being here.
Thank you so much to our candidates and to Kathy for her moderating.
So thank you, and good, again, everyone, good morning, because some of us are just getting here. But our next race is the 42nd Legislative District Representative Position 2 seat. And there's 2 candidates on your ballot, and I'd like to introduce candidates Sharon Shoemake and Vincent Buys. The state constitution prescribes that a representative must be a citizen of the United States and a qualified voter in the legislative district from which he or she was chosen. The House is made up of 98 members, 2 from each legislative district in the state. The total membership of the House is elected at the general election held in November of each even-numbered year. During legislative sessions, the legislature is called upon to enact or reject legislation affecting public policy in the state, provide for the levy and collection of taxes and other revenues to support state government and assist local government, and appropriate funds for these purposes. The House also has the exclusive power to bring impeachment proceedings. Although laws are enacted only when the legislature is convened in formal session, policy issues and the general operation of the state and local government are under continuous review by legislators serving on permanent and interim study committees. A representative's term of office is 2 years with an annual salary of $48,731. The rules we follow are the same as in the previous race. Candidates will have up to 2 minutes each with an opening statement. They'll have 1 minute each to respond to a question, and we'll have 1 minute again to make a closing statement. And again, each of you have a challenge card. Hold up your card so you know it. Good, great. And that candidates may use this card to challenge or rebut their opponent's response. The challenge questions, challenging candidate will have 45 seconds to state the challenge, and then the opponent will have 45 minutes to respond. Each candidate can use their card just 1 time. Seconds, did I say minutes? We'll be here for days. Carol Como and Judy Hopkinson indicate where they're seated, it says, and there they are right here in front. They're going to be tracking your time. Timers are going to flash that yellow card when there's 15 seconds remain, and a red sign to signal time's up. And then if the candidate continues, a bell will be rung, which of course means stop talking. We ask that the candidates be respectful of the allotted time due to the limited amount of time that we have and our desire to include as many questions as possible. We want to remind you, the audience, to please hold your applause, hold your snickers, hold your sighs when our candidates are answering their questions. Until the conclusion, then we're going to applaud. We encourage members of the audience to provide us with written questions. I hope you've noticed we really are prioritizing your questions over our canned questions from the League. Questions will be submitted to our question screening committee here. We have ushers who are available to pick up questions from you. Please be clear that the questions are going to be directed to both questions. Candidates, what did I say? To both candidates. Questions, our screeners are, Heather McKay-Brown and Annette Holcomb, and they're going to be screening for legibility and clarity and to try to avoid duplication. So we started with a roll of the die, and the candidate who had the highest score, highest toss, was offered the opportunity to either give the opening statement or the last closing, and Vincent Bies has chosen to provide the closing statement. Okay, so we covered the rules. Timers are ready. We're going to start and ask candidate Shoemake to make the opening statement.
Hi, my name is Sharon Shoemake. I'm running for state representative. I moved here after whale watching. I came up to watch a friend, to visit a friend, and we looked around and I thought, oh my, who gets to live here? So I'm an economist. I work at Western. When a job opened up at Western, I decided I was going to get it. And I did. And I'm here and I'm never leaving. I met my husband here. We have 2 children that were running around in the back and are hopefully at a playground right now. This is not something fun for kids. And one of the reasons that I'm running, I never thought I'd do anything like this, but I think it's time that we use science and evidence to make better decisions. And I was going to talk to everyone about preschool and how it's a win-win for both kids, for families, and it saves us taxpayer money in the long run. But after watching the last debate, I think we need to stand up for science. To say that the IPCC report, which I've heard Vincent do as well on the campaign trail, is a conspiracy is unconscionable. If you've ever worked with scientists, and I have, there are some in the room, I just saw one come up, these are people that want to nerd out and find answers to really interesting questions. They care deeply about this. The idea that you can get over 90 scientists from 40 countries in on a conspiracy theory is absurd. I can't get 90 people to agree on where to go for lunch. So if you really think this is a conspiracy theory, then maybe you need to go back to science class. I'm really disturbed that we're seeing this attack on science right now, and we have legislators who don't understand how the process works. She also called the IPC people anti-capitalist. So I'm an economist. Capitalism, socialism, these mean different things to other people. But I wanted you to know that Gregory Mankiw was on Romney's team. He supports putting a price on carbon. Bill Nordhaus, the guy that just won the Nobel Prize for the economics of climate change, he used to be a Republican until certain things happened. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Bies, can we have your 2-minute opening comments?
Well, thank you. Well, good morning. I guess it's still morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Representative Vincent Bies. I've been your state representative here in Whatcom County for the last 8 years. It has gone by very, very quickly, and it's been an honor to serve you down in Olympia. I serve on the Ag and Natural Resources Committee as the ranking member, so I lead my caucus on issues dealing with agriculture and natural resources. But I also serve Whatcom County on the Environment Committee, and as well on the Appropriations Committee, which is really the budget committee, making sure that the dollars that Whatcom County sends down to Olympia are being spent wisely. Over the last 8 years, we've done a lot of work here in Whatcom County, making sure that our businesses are able to stay here, making sure that we have strong infrastructure, and all the while making sure that we have a clean environment. We've been very, very active in making sure that the things that we do in Olympia are putting you and your values first. I'd love to have your support again this year. It's an interesting time to be in politics, but it's also great, and it is an honor to represent you down in Olympia, and I look forward to doing so for another 2 years. So thank you. When you get your ballots, please fill them out, and please remember to vote for Vincent Bies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, our first question is going to go to you, Candidate Bies, and you'll get a 1-minute response. People in Ferndale, Birch Bay, Blaine, and everyone with a private well relies on groundwater for drinking water. What legislation would you support to protect the quality of drinking water?
So we've done a lot of work to protect the quality of our drinking water here in Whatcom County. One of the big issues that comes out is the issues of nitrates. And looking at the science, we actually see that the nitrate issue is less of an issue than we thought it was. So it's said that, well, nitrates will lead to blue baby syndrome. Actually, it's more has to do with digestional bacteria in the gut of infants that has more to do with the blue baby syndrome and how that nitrates don't actually have an issue with that. One of the things we do continue to work on is actually more to do with our water quality in in our harbors and in our Puget Sound to make sure that our local shellfish industries are being able to harvest their shellfish. And so looking at regulations, getting money up here to do actual data and science on where is this pollution coming from. The fecal coliform count is a huge issue for our local shellfish growers. We've been putting money in to do the actual research to find out once and for all, where is this coming from?
Thank you. Candidate Shoemake.
Yeah, so Vincent Baez sponsored HB 2720, which was a bill that did not go anywhere, but it was designed to ensure that it was more difficult to regulate nitrates. And so I think that's really problematic. It was against the advice of ecology. These are the scientists that know this information really well and that are looking at this. I think that what we should be doing is listening to the experts. So there are some really great projects, especially through Whatcom Conservation District, that are examining, well, what are ways that we can better balance the needs of the dairy farmers and protecting the environment, right? So we look at these buffer strips. Do they have to be as big as they are, or are there places where we can allow farmers to farm a little bit of their land, but do other types of remediation? And so I think this is the way that we need to protect wells. We need to plan this holistically. We need to look at how all these drainage patterns interact and make sure that we have a really good plan for protecting our drinking water.
Okay, thank you. All right, Candidate Shoemake, we're going to go first on this next question with you. It's generally agreed that available mental health services do not meet the need, even for those able to afford private care. What action do you think the legislature could take or should take to increase the availability of such services?
So one of the things that I'd like to see is a move away from treating people with mental health problems in the prisons into treating people with mental health problems by getting the care that they need. So right now we spend more than we need to, because I was talking to someone yesterday in Maple Falls and she was telling me about her daughter who was going through a mental health crisis, and every time they called asking for help, what happened was the sheriff came out. And so they started getting a rap sheet, and so this started becoming a problem. It wasn't addressing the underlying health system, but it was costing us a lot of money and it was creating human misery. And so what I'd like to see are a whole bunch of different methods of ensuring that people like that get the health they need. My brother served in Afghanistan. He came back with some issues, as you might expect, and he had a social worker. And that social worker helped him figure out how to get the help he needed, how to keep his life back on track, and that was essential for him recovering from that really difficult time.
Thank you.
So we've done a lot over the last couple of years investing in our mental health situation here in Whatcom County and around the state. We've invested millions and millions of dollars into new housing and into new beds around Whatcom County to provide. I agree, we don't want to see our mental health people ending up in our prisons. Unfortunately, what we've seen, and I've asked some of our statewide law enforcement about this, when we saw the federal deinstitutionalization of our mental health institutions, what we saw is a direct corresponding relation to the population of those mental health people being introduced into our prison systems. That is not okay. I believe that our state must take a more active role in mental health and basically take it back from the federal government. The federal government has been a disaster in its response to the mental health care crisis because it cannot respond as well as the local community, because the bureaucrats that run those programs don't have the on-the-ground information that they need to make the best qualified decisions for our local communities.
Thank you. Candidate Baez, we're going to start with you on this next question. Many school districts are struggling to meet the needs of students, especially those who require special education. What do you think of the budget request by State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Reichdahl, to increase funding for the schools?
I agree. We've done a good job funding our schools. However, when we look at basically the matrix that shows how much we're going to fund our mental health. When we look at our special needs programs, we need to do a better job, and that's some of the work we've been doing over the last year after we passed the McGleary fix, is looking at addressing the funding imbalance that was happening in that. We need to make sure that we're funding appropriately our special needs programs. I do disagree with our good colleague, and I worked with him in the House, and he's a friend, but I do disagree strongly with him on the need for an income tax in order to do this, or a capital gains tax, call it what you will. But that's what he's recommending to do, and that's absolutely the wrong direction. We've got the dollars available for our schools. It's really a matter of allocating them appropriately.
Thank you. Candidate Shoemake?
Yeah, so when you have special needs students, those are the people that you have to ensure that their needs are met first, and then the money that's left over is what we use to fund everyone else. And so finding a smart way to fund these special needs students is really important. And right now, we do not have enough special ed teachers. I've spoken to a number of people in education here in Whatcom County, and they say that they simply can't hire them, and that they have to go out and use agencies to fill these positions. Well, the agencies are making money too, right? And so I think what we need to do is, I'm an economist, if you don't have enough of something, you raise the price, right? So maybe what we need to do for the shortage of special education teachers is we need to be willing to pay special educations more money. They probably have a more difficult job. That's why we're seeing this shortage. And that we need to ensure that we're able to hire those directly and not sort that information out through agencies, which costs us more money.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to give you this one first. Candidate Shoemake, are there any legislative measures you would support or propose to keep children safer in our schools?
Yeah, I haven't thought a whole lot about that, but I am a teacher myself. I work up at Western, and I have had students going through my classes that clearly have something going on in their life. And I always try to reach out to them. I get a little motherly with my students. I have 2 kids of my own and then 150 college students each year. And sometimes you don't reach out to everyone. So a few years ago, I had a student in a really big intro class who absolutely deserved to fail my class. And I did not fail him because I was worried about what he might do as a result. We need better cases of being able to look at kids like this, being able to reach out to students like this. We need to ensure that 18-year-olds aren't able to go out and buy an automatic weapon.
Thank you.
So a couple of things that we've done over the last while, and what we're seeing in our new schools as they're being built. Linden just has a new middle school. Everson, Nooksack are seeing new schools. Hopefully we'll see what Ferndale voters decide on a new school here. But what we're seeing is increased security protocols at these schools, making sure that we know the students that come into Ferndale High School, or the adults that come into Ferndale High School, are they teachers? Are they paraeducators? Making sure we know who those teachers are. One of the actual other things that we worked on in the legislature was there was a bill that went through, and the Building Code Council, and I sit on the State Building Code Council, had interpreted that to say we can only use this one type of emergency notification system. It was an old, antiquated type of system, but it was requiring all new buildings to use this old system. And we said, no, let's keep it broad and open, saying work with your local law enforcement to find a system, an electronic notification system that works for your school, that keeps your citizen or your students safe, and not rely on an old antiquated system.
Thank you. Okay, Candidate Byes, we're going to stick with some education questions here. Right. Many people struggle with education costs for preschool as well as college or vocational training. What would you do to make education more affordable for the preschool and post-high school?
One of the things, unfortunately, that we've done as a state is we've put more and more requirements on local preschools, and it really taxes them out of being able to exist. We had a local preschool here, a couple of them, that wanted to open up, and it wasn't until Erickson's office, my office, and Representative Van Werven's office got involved with the local departments and the state agency that certifies those preschools that we were actually able to get that preschool to open. Unfortunately, there's a big emphasis that all preschool has to be public preschool, and pushing those types of standards makes it more expensive. When you allow the free market to operate, and when you allow private schools also to have and operate preschools, we're able to do that. On the community and technical college, what we did when we had the Senate Majority Coalition, the Republicans in control of the Senate there, we actually decreased by 20% the cost of education for our community and technical college students. I believe that the best way to make college affordable for all is to reduce the cost across the board.
Thank you. Candidate Shoemake?
Yeah, so this is something where I think we need more data and evidence to make better decisions. Preschool is one of the best investments we can make as a society. For every $1 you spend, you get about $6 to $9 worth of benefits. It's good for kids, It's good for parents, and it actually saves us money in the long run because when kids go to preschool, they learn all these social skills. Like my 4-year-old says it's where you learn not to hit. He was going to take his teddy bear so the teddy bear doesn't hit. It's not just about learning not to hit, but it's about learning to sit, how to listen, basically how to learn. The first 1,000 days of a child's life are really important for cognitive development. So I think that we should have better birth through 5 programs generally, but especially we should ensure that every 3- and 4-year-old is able to attend preschool, no matter how much money their parents make. There's really, really good evidence on the benefits from this and from the cost savings. I don't understand why we're not doing it. As for for technical school and community college, I'd like to copy what Tennessee's done. They have let every student know that graduates from high school that they get the first 2 years of technical school and university for free.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start with you, candidate Shoemaker, now on the next question. What do you think are the best opportunities for economic development and job creation in your district?
This is a great question. So I believe in markets. I think markets work really well. But one of the things that we need to do when we're looking at markets is we need to ensure that we've taken care of all the infrastructure costs, that we've removed the barriers, that we've made it possible for people to find each other and work on ideas and have all the other things sorted out. So if we want to see economic development in this district, we need to ensure that we have excellent infrastructure that includes broadband internet connections. We need to ensure that we have an educated workforce. That I think community college and technical colleges should be free. This ends up costing less money than you think because a lot of these kids are available for federal grants. They just don't know it. And then we also need to ensure that we have affordable housing and affordable health care because it's really hard to start a business when you're slammed with these costs that don't need to be as expensive as they are right now.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, a lot of those costs are going to get more expensive if you pass the carbon tax this year, so I really encourage you not to pass the carbon tax. And that's one of the big things that we can do also to make sure that our economy stays vibrant here in Whatcom County and make sure that our industries can stay here. We've got a great manufacturing company here called iTech Solar Panels. They make a great product, solar panels. But unfortunately, while we have an aluminum smelter right here outside Ferndale, all their aluminum comes from someplace else. It comes from China. All the manufactured parts in those solar panels come from across the ocean. There are huge costs associated with bringing those in. Wouldn't it be great if we could actually encourage those parts to be developed here in Washington State? We've got a silicon manufacturer in Eastern Washington. We've got solar manufacturers, the ability to do it here. Let's make sure that we have an opportunity to bring those jobs here to Whatcom County, and instead we have a county council that pushes those jobs out, saying we don't want manufacturing in Whatcom County.
Okay, we have a challenge from candidate Shoemaker. You have 45 seconds to make your challenge.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that they don't import the that they do import the aluminum is because there's a whole bunch of different types of aluminum, there's a whole bunch of different types of plants, and using this global trade network is a really great way of economizing and getting exactly what you need. So how would you get all these different types of aluminum? How would you get all these different sorts of parts built here in Whatcom County?
The best way you can do that is lower the energy costs, make the energy costs most affordable in the world. We already have the highest labor costs, which makes our economy and our manufacturing the most disproportionate or the most disincentivized here. So if we can reduce our labor costs by reducing the economic burden that government places on those individual businesses, then we can bring those manufacturing jobs here, because those manufacturing jobs, that aluminum ingot that is pressed into a form here for your solar panels will be the greenest aluminum form panel that you will ever see. It'll be much greener than any of the aluminum that's manufactured and extruded over in China. I guarantee you.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we're going to go back to our original order. So I'm going to ask candidate Buys this next question. Declining salmon runs are a reality in the Salish Sea. What, if anything, should the legislature do to further protect the Salish Sea from continuing acidification and the rising temperatures?
One, from a scientific standpoint, the ocean is not acidifying, it is becoming more basic. So that is a big difference, and it is barely actually acidifying, so it's not an issue. One of the things that we see and we're working on is we got to get rid of pollution. Last year or 2 years ago, we saw over 1.5 billion gallons of raw sewage being pumped out from Seattle because of a septic or a stormwater system malfunction. We got to stop our big cities from polluting like this. One of the other things we're working on is increasing our salmon hatchery production. We're never going to get all the habitat back, no matter how much people want, unless Seattle's looking to move out of town and Bellingham's looking to move out of town. We're never going to have that salmon habitat back. And so one of the ways that we replace the fish that might have come through that salmon habitat is we have to have hatchery programs. And we're working on robust hatchery programs. We got a great hatchery management program out at Bellingham Technical College. They produce great students, and those students are going to go on to make sure that we have the salmon that we need to protect our orcas.
Thank you. Candidate Shoemake.
So this is more misinformation. Our oceans are acidifying. You can look at the IPCC report and listen to 90 scientists from 40 countries discuss it. As for hatchery programs, I absolutely support hatchery programs. I support looking at different ways to eliminate some of the non-salmon safe culverts. I think that's also a smart idea. It's something that the tribes basically pushed us into doing, and we should have been doing otherwise. But Vincent's right. A large part of it is habitat. And I think what we need to do is we need to continue pushing on this habitat front, finding ways that we can build our communities, have a good economy, but also provide the habitat that we need for salmon to flourish.
Okay, thank you. All right, let me think if this is not your last question. Currently, oil companies are sending mailers to all households indicating that under Initiative 1631, 8 out of the top 12 carbon emitters in the state are excluded, including coal-fired power plants. Other exemptions include aluminum smelters, pulp and paper mills, aircraft, iron and steel, chemical manufacturers, and other large corporations. If elected, would you work towards the largest polluters being required to reduce carbon emissions?
Yes. I am worried about some of the exemptions in 1631, and especially the coal plant in Centralia. But I have an idea of what we can do is we can basically have a merge of what we have right now is we're putting a price on carbon with the carbon fee. The other way of putting a price on carbon is with a cap and trade system. And so what I'd like to see is a hybrid of the cap and trade system with the carbon fee system. What it would do is it would make the coal plant just as well off as it is before. It won't necessarily cost them money, but it'll make sure all the incentives to reduce CO2 emissions are in place, and that it's all as economically efficient and as effective as it possibly can be.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we've already worked on with regard to our Alcoa plant out here is we've done a community state match with some community resources to look at basically it's a feed system out there. It's an improvement to their system that will reduce carbon emissions by more than any other program probably in Washington State. So we've invested as a state in that because we look at when you actually pull the data out and you say, how much carbon can we reduce for this amount of dollars? That is one of the best investments that we can make as a state, investing alongside Alcoa in making sure that they've got the most up-to-date. Over the last 20 years, the amount of carbon dioxide reduction that we've seen from our local manufacturers, whether it's Alcoa, BP, P66, has been phenomenal. And they've been able to do that largely without any government interference. And because we actually, if we look and invest our dollars, those are the projects that make the most sense, not these things like the initiative, which I would really encourage you to vote no on.
Thank you. Okay, this is your final question, so I'm just trying to figure out which one should I do. But so this is your last question, then you'll have your 1-minute closing. So housing is unaffordable for many families in Whatcom County. If elected, what would you do to address this issue?
So when we hear affordable housing and we hear like my opponent or Luann's opponent talking about we need more affordable housing, what they mean is we need more government housing. Unfortunately, what we see in Bellingham with our affordable housing, the Eleanor Estates, for example, it costs about $400 per square foot to build that facility to provide affordable housing. Any general contractor can build affordable housing for about $150 a square foot. So when we send money to the government to build affordable housing, it costs about 3 times the amount. When you buy a brand new house, you're paying about $200 per square foot for a brand new house here in Whatcom County. That's going to be a whole lot better value than buying affordable housing through the state. And so we're looking at making sure that our local builders are able to, through good land use policy, build more housing because they can do it much more cheaper and it's going to be a heck of a lot better quality than anything that the government's going to build. So that's the best way you can do.
Thank you.
When Vincent Baez says good land use policy, what he means is strip malls everywhere. He means that we are building on our precious farmlands, and we need to conserve these farmlands. We need to make sure that we're building along transit corridors and that we're building densely. So yes, it does cost a lot of money to build downtown apartments. That's not surprising to me. It does cost less money to build new buildings in the middle of what was once a beautiful farmland. The way that I see affordable housing is that we have underbuilt ourselves in a hole. So in 2010, we slashed the Housing Trust Fund. We have not yet restored that. We do make building too difficult in this county. And I'd like to find ways to build smart, not sprawl, and provide affordable housing for everyone. One of the reasons that we need to fund the Housing Trust Fund is that on their own, it's assuming that developers are not building low income and the missing middle housing. And so that does need to be funded by the government. And what that does is that lowers the housing for everyone, and it takes vulnerable people, gives them housing, and assures that they're not becoming homeless people who are then much more expensive in the long run.
Okay, thank you. And you know what? You had your challenge up, but this is we're over. So now is your opportunity. We're going to start with candidate Shoemake with your closing 1-minute statement.
Oh, I wasn't prepared. I was looking for a challenge. Thank you so much for coming out here. My name is Sharon Shoemake, and I'm running for state representative. I never, ever thought I'd do something like this. I have the absolute best job. I get to work with Western students. I get to talk about economics. I get to nerd out in my office with data all day. But I'm doing this because I didn't see the values that I care about being represented by our representatives in Whatcom County. I didn't see them using science and evidence. I heard conspiracy theories about science, misinformation repeatedly, and I don't see us looking for smart solutions. So Vincent Baez thinks a capital gains tax and an income tax are the same. He might be true on the definition, but I think most people understand an income tax as a tax on labor. And so I do not want a labor income tax. What I do want to see is I want to see your property taxes, your sales taxes reduced, or at least not increase anymore, and instead us funding the way that we live our lives, that we fund our schools, that we take care of our infrastructure with a tax on capital gains. This would be mostly paid for by Seattle. I support Seattle paying for our schools. Vincent Baez wants you to pay for it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here again. My name is Vincent Baez. I'm your state representative here in Whatcom County. It's been an honor to serve you again. And unlike what you just heard, I don't want strip malls everywhere. I don't want to go over farming and put pavement over everything. But I do want to make sure our farms are profitable. I do want to make sure our farmers can stay in business, because if they can't, the best value for that land then, if government makes it too expensive, is housing. So make our farmers good, make our economy good. That's what I'm doing down in Olympia. I'd love to have your support down there. It's been a great time here today. I think you've seen a pretty stark contrast between us. I'm honored and pleased to be endorsed by all 6 of our rural mayors, because they understand that I'm working for them. We've looked at housing up in Blaine. We've looked at infrastructure up in Blaine. We're supporting those projects. We've supported projects here in Whatcom County. I'm looking to make sure that your taxes are as low as possible and your government is as limited as we can make it. Thank you. Make sure you vote for Vincent Baez. Thank you.
Okay, let's thank our candidates for being here today, and thank you for running for public office.
So thank you to our candidates and to Rebecca for moderating. So the final forum of the morning is between the candidates for the 42nd Legislative District State Senator's position. Kathy Washatka will moderate this, and she will introduce the candidates and explain the rules. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, that's staying there. Okay, for those who may have come in just now to see this last forum, I'll read the rules to you. Our last debate this morning will be candidates for the 42nd Legislative District State Senator seat. There are 2 candidates on your ballot for this race, and here they come. Candidates Doug Erickson and Pinky Vargas. So the office description: the Washington State Senate is made up of 49 members, 1 from each legislative district in the state. 1/2 of the membership of the Senate is elected at the general election held in November of each even-numbered year. During legislative sessions, the legislature is called upon to enact or reject legislation affecting public policy in the state, provide for the levy and collection of taxes and other revenue to support state government and assist local government, and appropriate funds for these purposes. The Senate also has the exclusive power to confirm certain gubernatorial appointments. Although laws are enacted only when the legislature is convened in formal session, policy issues and the general operation of state and local government are under continuous review by legislators serving on permanent and interim study committees. Washington state senators serve 4-year terms, and their annual salary is $48,731. The rules we follow will be the same as the previous races. Candidates will have up to 2 minutes each for an opening statement. They will have 1 minute to respond to each question and will make a 1-minute closing statement. Each candidate has a challenge card. Can you show us your challenge cards? Thanks. Candidates may use this card to challenge or rebut their opponent's response. The challenging candidate will have 45 seconds to state the challenge, and the opponent will have 45 seconds to respond to the challenge. Each candidate may use the challenge card just one time. And we have our timers, our trusty timers, Carol Como and Judy Hopkinson, and they'll be tracking the time. They'll flash a yellow sign when 15 seconds remain, red sign to signal time is up, and if the candidate continues, the bell gets rung to signal stop talking. We ask that the candidates be respectful of the time allotted due to the limited amount of time we have and our desire to include as many questions as possible. I'd like to again remind the audience to hold your applause until the conclusion of the forum. We encourage members of the audience to provide written questions for the candidates. These guys have been so busy all morning going through your questions. They will be, anything that you submit and they choose will be asked of both candidates. Ushers are available to pick up your questions and bring them to the screeners at the table. Questions are being screened by Annette Holcomb and Heather Mackay-Brown, and they'll be screening for legibility, clarity, and to avoid duplication. So to begin, the candidates roll the dice, and the high roller won, and that's candidate Vargas, who will go, no, I'm sorry. Candidate Erickson will go first.
Hey, great. I'm Senator Doug Erickson. It's been an honor to serve the people of Whatcom County in the state legislature for the past 8 years and to serve the people before that in the State House of Representatives. One of my main focuses in that capacity is to make sure that as many people as possible have the opportunity to achieve the American dream. And we do that by investing in our education, which we have now accomplished in Olympia. We do that by working to preserve and create great paying jobs here in Whatcom County, because with strong jobs come great families. And also we work to protect our quality of life, because we all live here for a reason. We love the quality of life that we're able to enjoy in Whatcom County, the recreational opportunities, to go from Mount Baker out to the San Juan Islands. It's a unique place. We need to protect and preserve it for future generations while we have the chance to enjoy this great quality of life that we have here. It's been an interesting campaign to date, and now the ballots are in the mail. So now is the part of the campaign where we compare the candidates. One of the things my opponent has talked a lot about is the tax system in Washington state being unfair to middle class, low income, and fixed income individuals. Yet my opponent supports a $30 billion tax on energy that will adversely impact the middle class, low income, and fixed income people the most. Pinky, you don't reduce the tax burden on those people by increasing taxes on those people. We've talked a lot about affordable housing in Whatcom County and around Washington state. Yet my opponent has done everything she can to increase the cost of housing in Bellingham through new taxes, through new fees, and new regulations, voting 6 times in 5 years to raise property taxes on people, and introducing the most expensive energy bill in Washington state, which would add tens of thousands of dollars to the cost of a house. Pinky, you don't make housing more affordable by making it more expensive. And on health care, we need to bring down the cost of health care here in Washington state. That is for certain, and I've introduced specific bills in Olympia to get that accomplished, to provide people with more options. Pinky's voted 3 times to raise her own salary, while at the same time voting for a $1.2 million tax increase on our local hospital, resulting in them closing their Alzheimer unit and their adult daycare. Pinky, you don't make health care more affordable by making it more expensive.
Thank you. Candidate Vargas.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Pinky Vargas, and I'm running for State Senate because I believe it's time we put people first. We live in beautiful Whatcom County. We value our people here, and we believe in being good stewards of our land. We want our communities and our families to thrive, so we need to work together to find solutions for affordability in housing, in healthcare, in public education, and ensure that we're doing what we can to protect family wage jobs. We need access to water, affordable health care, expanding coverage on mental health and opioid treatment. We need to invest in public safety infrastructure with overpasses, safe walking trails, and cell phone and internet access for everybody throughout Whatcom County. A little bit about me. I grew up on a farm that my great-grandparents homesteaded over 100 years ago. Our farmhouse did not have running water till I was 10 years old. I am very aware how precious and critical water access is. I'm from a very big family. I have 56 first cousins, so that's a really great training ground for politics because there's a lot of diversity in opinions in a big family. And I think that's something that's missing in our cultural and in our electoral system right now, is being able to talk to each other, work together, and find solutions together. I moved here 22 years ago. I married a U.S. Marine who was stationed on Whidbey Island. Thank you to our veterans for your service. I have a great job at Puget Sound Energy. I work on energy efficiency with the ports, the tribes, the cities, and the schools on reducing energy efficiency. I am in my second term on Bellingham City Council, where I've been able to build the relationships and to take me to Olympia to solve and work on our problems together. Again, I'm Pinky Vargas. I'd be honored to earn your vote.
Thank you. So first question, we're going to start with Ms. Vargas. What qualities do you possess that differentiate you from your opponent in being an effective representative for this district?
Well, I actually do work with the people in Whatcom County. I've worked with many of them on energy efficiency, economic development, and tourism. And everybody knows that I show up to all my committee meetings, I keep my word, and I do the work. And I think another thing is, even people who I don't agree with on maybe some political issues, we all know that we have to solve things together. My work on energy efficiency makes me work with all the businesses throughout Whatcom County. I don't care what their political views are. We have things to do and we have to work together. Most people find me that I'm reasonable to work with, I'm a good listener, and they know I'm going to show up to my job and do the work.
Thank you. Candidate Erickson.
Well, thank you. I've been representing the people of Whatcom County now in the State House and in the State Senate, and I represent the values of the people of Whatcom County. I fight for the jobs at Cherry Point, and I fight for our agricultural workers. I'm not supporting legislation that would put people out of work, that would take our good-paying jobs at Cherry Point and send them overseas. I think that's one big difference between me and my opponent. I support our workers. I support the families that have great family wage jobs in Whatcom County, and she supports a $30 billion tax increase that would send manufacturing jobs to other states and other countries. I've been endorsed by all 6 of our rural mayors here in Whatcom County because they know I work with them to get things done for Whatcom County. I've been endorsed by the local farm bureau because the farmers know I'm fighting for them every single day in Olympia because they want to live the American dream. They want to pass their farm on to their kids. And they know that the regulations supported by my opponent will drive them out of the state or to eastern Washington because they cannot farm under the rules, regulations, and tax load that my opponent supports. So the greatest difference, I think, is I represent the values, the people, the workers, the farmers of Whatcom County, and my opponent's working for downtown Seattle.
Thank you. Candidate Erickson, we'll start with you. Do you think I-639 is a necessary and adequate approach to avoid gun violence? Please explain and include any other ideas you have.
Well, Initiative 1639 is a great overreach when it comes to the gun issue in Washington State. It would be the most restrictive firearm laws in the country. We have a constitutional right in our Second Amendment to keep and bear arms. We also have a constitutional protection in our Washington State Constitution, which is actually even more broad in nature than the U.S. Constitution when it comes to people's right for arms. People have a right to protect themselves. Initiative 1639 would make it more difficult for people to be able to protect themselves in their homes. That's just wrong. Initiative 1639 is a grave overreach. So no, I do not support Initiative 1639. I think it's a bad step for Washington State. It's bad. It defies our Constitution. It will put more people at risk. It will turn a lot of law-abiding gun owners into criminals while criminals will still have the same access to guns in Whatcom County and Washington State. I would urge the people to vote no on Initiative 1639 to protect our Constitution, to protect people's rights here in Whatcom County to defend themselves and to defend their families.
Thank you. Candidate Vargas?
I absolutely support Initiative 1639. I think what's going on in our country is awful. Our children should not be afraid to be in school. That should be a safe place for them to be. 1639 is about gun responsibility. It's about ensuring that we have safety standards and people have education on how to use weapons before they use them. There's nothing wrong with that. We have to learn how to use how to get a driver's license and drive a car. Safety standards are a good thing. They prevent violence. They help prevent suicides. These are things we need to address right now in our country. I grew up in a house of guns. I was married to a Marine who was a marksman. It's not like I'm trying to take people's guns away. I just want to ensure that there's more gun responsibility. And responsibility is something we can do, and I support us moving forward.
Thank you. We're going to start with Candidate Vargas. Do you support the extension of the Canadian Trans Mountain Pipeline to Cherry Point and south through Whatcom County? Why or why not?
So I'm concerned about the extension of the Trans Mountain Pipeline because I think that it can affect our environment. If there's spills, that can affect our oceans. And I also am worried about digging up more ground in regards to how we're going to affect our environment. I also recognize that we are very dependent on fossil fuels right now, and moving fossil fuels around is a difficult challenge. But we have safety concerns, we have environmental concerns, and I think we should be able to utilize all the pipelines that we have now to move everything across and move towards distributing renewable energy.
Thank you. Candidate Erickson?
Yeah, this is a bit of a, I think this question's got a little confused, I think, in terms of what's actually happening. You know, the pipeline in question is being built in Canada. This is the one that connects Alberta to the port communities up in British Columbia. The issue with Whatcom County is we do have a pipeline that connects into that pipeline. And if the Canadian pipeline is expanded, we will be able to receive more product through that pipeline, which is a very safe way to transport product in Washington State. I'd rather see it coming in via pipeline than via rail. So I think that is a good move. They're able to expand their pipeline up in Canada. We'll be able to increase the amount of oil flowing to the refineries here in Washington State without the need to put in a separate pipeline in Whatcom County to get that accomplished. The pipeline already exists in Whatcom County. The pipeline already exists in Skagit County. And the pipeline already runs down to the airports at SeaTac, where we send down our jet fuel to SeaTac and down to Portland for the people that utilize the Jet A fuel too. So it's really a Canadian decision if they decide to build that pipeline or not.
Thank you. Candidate Erickson, we'll start with you on this one. What role, if any, is there for tax reform in building a vibrant state economy? Please explain.
Well, that's a great question. You know, tax code is one of the most complicated things. And one of the things I always say is never trust a person who says that you're going to go tax somebody else and you're not going to pay it. Oh, it's just the people in Seattle that are going to pay it. Oh, it's just the richest 50 people that are going to pay it. That's not the way it works when it comes to taxation. What we need in Washington State is a broad, fair tax base, which is as flat as possible, as fair as possible, with a minimum number of exemptions. And I've worked on that in Olympia, but it's very hard to get that accomplished, particularly in a split level. One of the things that we did pass 2 years ago was a piece of legislation to unify our B&O manufacturing rates. This would have been great for Whatcom County. It would have brought everybody to the exact same rate, which is the way we should do taxation. You shouldn't have special carve-outs for certain industries. So we negotiated a deal in Olympia, would have lowered the manufacturing rates for all manufacturers, small and large in Washington. We got the votes. Democrats, Republicans came together. Last minute, after shaking hands to say deal's good, Jay Inslee vetoed that bill. So it's very hard to move forward in Olympia when you're dealing with people who will shake hands and then break their word.
Thank you. Candidate Vargas?
We have an incredibly regressive tax system. It's one of the worst in the country. And a lot of the burden does go on people who are lower and middle income. We do need better distribution. We also need to look at how we're collecting and distributing our taxes that we have right now. There's a lot of tax loopholes that we could close that have been in there for a long time that no longer serve the purpose or create the jobs that they said that they were going to do. We can also look at what committees and commissions that actually don't need to exist in the government, reduce reduce some of those and make sure that that income is going back. We actually have a horse racing commission. I'm not really sure why we have that at Washington State, but I think that's something we could maybe kind of get rid of and look at ensure that we're putting our income back into places we need to and ensuring that we're not putting the burden on the lower and middle income.
And we have a challenge.
Thank you. I'd just like to clarify, and what my opponent just said is that she believes that we have the most regressive tax system in America. We can debate that. But if Pinky actually believes we have the most regressive tax system in the country, why in the world is she supporting a $30 billion regressive tax on energy, which specifically targets low income, fixed income, and middle-class Washingtonians? They will pay the highest percent of their income on this tax. A $30 billion, the most regressive tax increase ever proposed in Washington State, the largest tax increase ever proposed in Washington State, which specifically will impact the most middle-class, working families, and low income. Not to mention what it will do to drive jobs out of Washington State. So when you say you're against regressive taxes, but you're supporting a $30 billion regressive tax, it's pretty hard to understand which side of your mouth you're talking about when you're talking about taxes.
Candidate Vargas?
I only speak forward. I do support Initiative 1639 because we need to move away from fossil fuels and we need to invest in renewable energy. Will actually bring down costs for us in the future. I also want to address his claim that I voted for property taxes every year. Every year, in our budgets, we get an opportunity, every city and county does, to increase by 1% of our base of our property tax. Most of the cities and the counties take this. Even Linden did it this year. And also the fact that I raised my own salary, it's in our city budget. It's a city ordinance. I voted for it just like Doug votes for his salary in 2013, 15, and 17. It's in our budgets.
Okay, thank you. And so we're going to go back to our regular order, and we're going to start with you, Candidate Vargas, sorry. Do you think I-1631 could create new jobs in Whatcom County? Why or why not?
Absolutely it can. I'm evidence of that. Years ago when Obama put money in for stimulus for energy efficiency, that's how I got my job at Puget Sound Energy. I've worked with all of the counties up here, Snohomish, Whatcom, Island, and Skagit, all on reducing energy efficiency with their cities, with their schools, with the ports, with all of their businesses. It was investing that money so that we could reduce energy and create jobs. I absolutely think it's possible for us to create jobs. That is part of the solution. Look at iTech. They got started because we were able to invest in renewable energies locally. And the more that we do that here in Washington State, it'll bring down the costs of people, it will increase our renewable energy, and it can turn us around.
Thank you. Candidate Erickson?
Well, yeah, if you take $30 billion from the taxpayers of Washington State, clearly you're going to create some jobs, many in government or types of jobs that Pinky has had using taxpayer dollars to go and do things. But what's key about this initiative, it specifically says $50 million will be set aside for worker retraining for the people that lose their jobs. And that fund will be replenished every year because the initiative writers know that thousands of people will lose their jobs. If Alcoa shuts down, if P66 shuts down, it's not just those jobs. Those jobs have the highest job multiplier of any job in Whatcom County. So it's the refinery worker, your neighbor that works there. It's the person that works at the barista, as the barista at the coffee shop that will lose their job because of this initiative when these jobs leave Washington State. We should not be taxing jobs out of Washington. We should be creating more manufacturing jobs because we have low-cost energy. We should locate manufacturing plants to make the solar panel components that Representative Byes talked about in Moses Lake. But your support of massive tax increases will drive those jobs to other states and other countries, harming us long-term.
Thank you. I believe we're to our last question. Am I right on the timing? You have some more time. Okay, good. So we're going to start with Candidate Erickson on this one. It's generally agreed that available mental health services do not meet the need, even for those able to afford private care. What action do you think the legislature can or should take to increase the availability of such services?
Yeah, this is an incredibly important issue. It deals with homelessness, it deals with families, it deals with keeping our communities and streets safe. So we have been working very hard on this in the past few years, and a proposal is going to come forward next year that will include a state bond to be able to go back and rebuild facilities in Washington State. Right now, the estimate of that bond is about $500 million that we'll put out to see if we can get support for, to be able to rebuild facilities. One of the great mistakes that was made in Washington State was when we closed down facilities like Northern State. We need to get facilities built again. We need to have beds for people to be able to be taken care of. We need to have treatment available to those folks. The other thing that we're committing to do in the upcoming legislative session is to make a bigger part of the growth of our budget dedicated to mental health. Some people are proposing 50%. That might be the right number. It might be high. It might be low. But we have to do the bond. We have to build the facilities. And we have to make a commitment to funding mental health care here in Washington State. Just like we did with education, we can do it for mental health, and we can get it funded without raising the taxes on the people of Washington.
Thank you. Candidate Vargas?
Yeah, so mental health is something that I think our country is suffering terribly with. A lot of people have been left behind. There's no funding, there's no access, and all the people who need the mental health have ended up on our streets or in our prison. That is not how we should be taking care of our people. We absolutely need to ensure that we have more funding for mental health and that we're looking at alternatives and diversions, and we're looking at mental health court instead of putting people in prison. So all of these things are layered on, and I do agree with Doug on this point because I think that is something we have in common. We both agree that we need to help people who don't have the funds or the access. So I support more mental health funding, and by the way, that does come through taxes.
Candidate Vargas, what do you plan to do to clean up toxic sites in Whatcom County better and faster, and who should pay for these cleanups?
Mm-hmm. So right now we have the Model Toxins Cleanup Fund, MCT, MUTCA funds, and those are paid for right now partly by our oil industry who does mitigation funds, which is also what 1631 is mitigation funds. It's a fee, not a tax. And those are ways that we can have more accessibility for funding. Like on the waterfront, we needed those MOTCA funds, which were actually held up for a little while in the legislature and kind of held at risk because of our budget. So ensuring that we have legislators who are prioritizing environmental cleanup and ensuring that those dollars are there so we can help a lot of our communities who got left with big messes over the years and don't have the money to clean it up. So we can all move forward with a cleaner environment.
Thank you. Candidate Erickson?
Yeah, this is an incredibly important issue I've been working on in Olympia. The Model Toxin Control Act, the MOTCA program, is funded what's called the Hazardous Substance Tax, which is a tax on barrels of oil that come into Washington State. For many years, that fund was being raided. Unfortunately, when the Democrats controlled the legislature, they were taking the money out of that fund and moving it over to the general fund so we couldn't clean up those sites. What I led the effort to do was create what's called the Environmental Legacy and Stewardship Account, ELSA funds, where we capture those dollars and we make sure they're going back to the communities to clean up toxic sites as fast as possible. We've also been working very hard to reform the permitting system so that these projects are not held up in the permitting process, so we can flow through on a 10-year plan. And you're seeing the results of that right now on Bellingham Bay, where we're getting the GP site cleaned up faster and better, working with the port, working with the excellent people there to get that accomplished. We're not done with this process yet, and we have to make sure next year that we also protect those hazardous substance tax funds in the MOTCA account from being diverted over to the general fund as they were in the past. I'm committed to keeping those funds there to clean up toxic sites, to do it faster and better, because it's great for our communities.
Thank you. Candidate Erickson, this one's you to start. Do you think the legislature has complied with the McCleary decision requiring our state to fully fund our schools? Why or why not?
Yeah, so McCleary decision was by the court saying that the state of Washington was not adequately and fairly funding public schools. I believe it was an overreach by the state Supreme Court. If they want to be legislators, they should take off their robes, they should run for the legislature, get elected, and write a budget. But this is what happened. The Supreme Court made this decision. Some people in the legislature thought we had to try to comply, so we did. And we did fund education. And the way we did it was by making education a priority again. Under Republican leadership in the state Senate, we dedicated 75% of all government growth to K-12 education and higher ed, 75%. Prior to that, under Democrat control, 25% of all government growth went to education. Think about that for a second. Which party actually made education a priority? It was when the Republicans took over the Senate. We reduced college tuition by 20% to get that accomplished. Last year, the court said, yes, You have fully met your McCleary obligations, and schools are fully funded. So we have met that. The court has said we have met that, and we have done it by investing priorities and also by reducing property taxes here in Whatcom County.
Thank you. Candidate Vargas?
So the McCleary decision happened because the legislature could not get education paid for, and the Republican majority in the Senate, which Doug Erickson was a part of, was the reason that we couldn't fund education. And one of the things that it did is it absolutely did not fully fund it right now. We're covering only about 1 to 3, or grades 1 to 3. We need to make sure that we're funding all of our schools, and we also need to make sure that the support staff is getting paid for, that special education teachers get paid for. None of that is included right now in the funding. So if you do want people to focus on education, and I am supported by the Washington Education Association, they believe that I will support teachers and I will support funding for our children and our future. And by the way, when Doug Erickson had an opportunity to vote for our future, he voted against breakfast after the bell to make sure our kids were fed in school. So that's the support you get from him.
Thank you. You're going to start with this one, Candidate Vargas. What are you willing to do to address the homelessness issue in Whatcom County?
While I've been serving on City Council, trying to help people who are experiencing homelessness has been one of the most challenging and complex issues that I've dealt with. We definitely have a housing shortage. We have mental health coverage that we need. We need to ensure that we have affordable housing. This is really complex. And a lot of the reasons our people are homeless is because they can't afford to stay in the place that they're living, or they're getting outpriced in the market. A lot of people can't start a family and live here in Bellingham. So we need to increase our housing stock, put more money into mental health to help people off the street. We have a great program at City Council called the HOT program, where we outreach to people in the community and we help lead them to the services. And I think those are the things that we can support at the state legislature.
Thank you. Candidate Erickson?
Yeah, homelessness is a big and growing issue in Whatcom County, and particularly in Bellingham, which is kind of interesting because nationwide, since 2008, homelessness has actually been declining. Since Pinky Vargas was elected to office in 2013, homelessness in Bellingham has increased by 65%. And those are Opportunity Council numbers. So if you look at what needs to be done for homelessness, you really have to look at what the opposite of what Seattle and Bellingham are doing, because it clearly is not working. They've turned Bellingham into a place where homeless people try to come because they can get services where they can remain on drugs and still get services. This is the wrong direction. And the other part you have to remember is if you want to make housing more affordable, you don't make housing more expensive. Everything Pinky Vargas has done in the City Council in Bellingham has been to make housing more expensive, to make it more difficult to create a job in Whatcom County and in Bellingham. So the wrong direction is what has resulted in 65% increase in homelessness since Pinky was elected, compared to a nationwide trend of homelessness decreasing around the country.
Okay, and we have a challenge, so we're going to make this the last piece of this part of the forum. So go ahead, Candidate Vargas.
Homelessness has been increasing in this country dramatically over the years. We are not the only ones suffering from this, and it has not been decreasing. It's been increasing steadily. Google it. So, you know, the only way that we can address these things, and by the way, I have worked with developers here on incentives to help development and growth in building. So the only way that we can do this is actually working together and finding solutions. But there is absolutely, oh, and also our point of contact on every year, we ask people, where do they come from if they are experiencing homelessness? And 70% consistently say they are from Whatcom County, not from other places.
Thank you. Candidate Erickson?
And that 70% number is simply not accurate, because this is the place where they're more recently from. They are coming from other states. That's being shown in the data, particularly with regards to the criminal homeless and the violence that's on our streets right now. Homelessness is decreasing nationwide. But in places like Bellingham, in Seattle, it's increasing dramatically because of the programs that are put in place by people like Pinky Vargas. Those are not the programs we need to emulate throughout Whatcom County and Washington State. We should be doing more like Pierce County is doing, with good leadership there to be able to address the situation. So going forward, we'll be working on that to get that accomplished. So I'd just like to highlight that under Pinky's time in City Council, she's done things to make housing more expensive, make it tougher to create a job, increase fees and regulations, which leads to more people not being able to afford housing in Bellingham.
Thank you. So now we have our closing statements. I'm going to get it right this time. We're going to start with candidate Erickson.
I led off on the first one, didn't I?
Pardon?
I went first on the first one. Doesn't mean I go last on the last one?
No, candidate
No?
Vargas won the roll of the dice, so she gets to go last.
Oh, okay, great. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming out today. I'm Doug Erickson. My wife, Tasha, and I grew up in Bellingham. I'm the youngest son of a Lutheran minister, grew up on 14th Street in South Hill, middle class family growing up. Seahome High School, both my wife and I went there, went on to college. And now we're living the American dream. We bought acreage out in the county. We have a well and a septic, built our house, raised our family. It's an amazing thing to do. And that's what I want for other people in Whatcom County, to be able to live the American dream the way they want to live it. When the Hearst decision came down and people were told they couldn't build their homes, Vince, Luann, and I went to work in Olympia, and we fixed that. And now those families who were denied their ability to have the American dream have it because they can build their home on their water with their well. When Alcoa announced they were going to shut down, Vince and Luann and I went to work because we wanted to protect those 700 jobs at Alcoa so those people could live the American dream. Now Alcoa is operating at full capacity, 700 more family wage jobs so they can live the American dream. I work with our farmers every day so they can pass their farm down to their kids and they can live the American dream. Working together, and with your vote, I'll go back to Olympia and keep fighting to protect the American dream for all people in Whatcom County.
Candidate Vargas.
I'm Pinky Vargas, and I first ran for office because I wanted to be a voice for women, the environment, and social justice. And I can see that we need that voice even more right now. I do have progressive values, but I have moderate sensibilities, and I will always try to balance how are we going to improve people's lives, but how are we going to pay for it? I worked with many of you over the years on energy efficiency, economic development, and tourism. I serve on the Bellingham Chamber. I'm a member of the WBA and Sustainable Connections. And as your state senator, I will show up to my committees, I will do the work, and I will ensure that all our voices are heard. I will advocate for funding for public infrastructure, for overpasses, for tourism, and for economic development. I will support ag and work with our refineries to keep our jobs here. I'm endorsed by the building trades, the teachers, the nurses, the firefighters, Planned Parenthood, and Washington Conservation voters. You can find me at votepinkyvargas.com. I'd be honored to earn your vote. Vote Pinky.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking both candidates.